Gary Dwayne Payton Sr., born July 23, 1968. 3 reasons Gary Payton had to ring chase a championship. Golden eras. Entertainment always has them. The players at the top of the game at the time are usually remembered forever and given permanent flowers for it at some point, even if another player comes along better. It's the reason you can't tell a Michael Jordan fan that came up during his greatness, LeBron James is better. It's why you can't tell a LeBron fan Giannis or Kevin Durant has surpassed him and are now better. The 90s was one of the golden eras for basketball that I'm sure holds a special place in the hearts of all fans of the game that witnessed what that era had to offer. It was hard-nosed, competitive in every way, balanced, so much so you could have a team from Utah competing for a championship, Detroit, San Antonio, and the Seattle Supersonics. Not much like today, where those championship caliber, small market franchises are the league's bottom of the barrel and eaten up by superstars taking the easy way, as I see it, to glory, knowing the short-term memory of fans won't remember the context of how they won. One small market team in particular isn't even around any longer. Of course, the Gary Payton, Shawn Kemp led Supersonics that featured at one point one of the greatest two-way players to ever play the game. A trash-talking, edge-seeking competitor that, if not for the following 3 reasons, wouldn't have had to ring chase at the end of his career on large market teams he tried to bury every night. Today's story will help you understand how great Payton was, the expectations for him, and why he couldn't win a championship in his prime when he was the best defensive mixed with offensive point guard ever. 9-time All-Defensive First Team, Defensive Player of the Year, 9-time Allstar, and of course, we have to call him a champion for the bench-riding, shot-in-the-dark win with Miami in 2006. He's one of the top 50 greatest players of the 90s and well-respected historically, but was held from the ultimate goal in the 90s, winning a championship. Let's talk about it. It's your boy JC, Stunted Growth. Let's get it, man. Gary Payton was a 6'4" point guard born and raised on the east side of Oakland, California. He was always the youngest kid on the playground and saw that as his opportunity to get ahead of his competition, using them to prepare him for when he was their age. It's where he learned and honed the art of mentally disturbing you with words. He saw that when he gave an opponent time and focus on his team's plays and individual goals, the player would always perform better, so he decided to become a distraction verbally, as well as using it to help himself focus on his task. Because what good is a trash talker who can't back it up? He chose Oregon State University and there became the best player in school history and one of the best individual college players at the time by his senior season. Stunt number 1, Shawn Kemp. Understanding professional sports is the true meaning of understanding team and how the next man can gravely affect your results. The higher the level you ascend from amateur into the pros, the more real that becomes, especially when money is now involved. Keyword, money. Gary Payton, like I said, was a flat-out star in college on both ends. In his final 2 seasons, he averaged 3 or more steals a game and over 8 assists. Add to that his 20 points a game as a junior and 25.7 as a senior, and you have a number 1 pick caliber player that, had it not been the golden era for big man as well, he would have easily went number 1. He'd have to settle for the number 2 pick behind Derek Coleman. He was taken by Seattle, who had a much-needed goal to find a franchise point guard and superstar. Payton was slow finding his NBA dominance like he did in college, but you could see he was definitely the leader on the floor a coach would need. He averaged modest numbers over his first 2 seasons, making second-team All-Rookie and showing glimpses of improvement in year 2. By year 3, he and Shawn Kemp, who he met on the Sonics, began to hit their stride, looking like a bright duo that could battle the best and maybe even win. Payton was already a force on the defensive end, beginning his 7 straight years averaging more than 2 steals per game. In 93-94, year 4 for Gary, he made his first All-Star team, leading the team in assists and steals. Shawn Kemp was in the second year of his 6-year All-Star run, making the emerging duo out west poised to one day take the Sonics to the promised land. That day finally came during the 95-96 season. By then, Kemp was a dominating and exciting frontcourt player, while Gary solidified himself that season as a top 3, if not the best point guard in the league. He averaged a career-high 2.9 steals a game, over 19 points, and 7.5 assists, showing he could do all that position asked for. Together, they took Seattle all the way to the 96 NBA Finals, but lost to a Chicago Bulls team that exploited one of George Karl's self-proclaimed biggest series blunders, not putting Gary Payton on Jordan until down 3-0. The Sonics would lose 4-2 against the Bulls, making the last time they'd get that close in Payton's Sonic career. Kemp, who signed a low-ball contract back in 1994, began to regret not being able to adjust the contract's parameters while he was performing so well, so began distancing himself from the team. He held out of training camp for 22 days before returning to play in the 96-97 season, which would be his final season with the Sonics and 1 year after going to the finals. It was Shawn and Gary's prime by then, and their hard work was finally paying off. Just not the amount dollar-wise for Kemp. Before the season, the team also signed free agent McElveen to a contract richer than Kemp's at the time, a player that averaged 3 points on the Sonics' 96-97 team. They lost in the second round to the Rockets, and Kemp was traded to Cleveland for Vin Baker and throw-ins. The Sonics and Payton were never the same, never making it past the second round for the rest of his Sonic career. Stunt number 2, Michael Jordan.
You just got to tire him out. And I kept hitting him and banging him and hitting him and banging him. It took a toll on Mike. So resting him a little bit.
Yes, I know. This could also be called the Michael Jordan Still Lives in Your Head if you were a superstar in the 90s series. It's one of the reasons I have so much respect for Jordan the player, because he dominated his competition. A mindset you can carry in any walk of life. At least strive to dominate. You won't always win, but try and you will land in a great spot. Many talk about the Mamba mentality and attribute it to Kobe, but this guy was his sensei. Kobe just branded it better. In the 90s, if Michael Jordan played, you weren't winning, simple as that. 94, 95, sorry Orlando, sorry Houston, that don't count. Yeah, it does, but you know what I'm saying. Mike won 6 rings in the 90s, 2 three-peats, and retired after the 97-98 season, where he could have easily closed out the decade winning the next 2. In his documentary The Last Dance, when watching Gary Payton claim he made it tough in the 96 finals when he was finally allowed to guard Jordan, Michael threw his head back in hysteria, then proceeded to give Gary Payton half a bar like all the cats that threw shots at Jigga. He was right for his response, and Payton was right not to make it a big deal, because if it's one thing Michael did was make his opponents in the 90s completely understand they had no chance.
The glove. I had no problem with the glove. I had no problem with Gary Payton.
Stunt number 3, Seattle transitioning. It was an emotional move for the Sonics to give up Shawn Kemp for Vin Baker, sending him where players in the 90s went to die. Kemp was in his prime. Gary was also in the early parts of his, with his brightest years ahead of him, and the Sonics thought it was a good time to transition. Keyword thought. But with the disappointment Vin Baker became for them, it's what they were forced to do. A year after Vin got there, the Rashard Lewis project began, but wasn't enough to compete, leading the Sonics to missing the playoffs or first-round exits during this transition without another superstar. Payton hung in there for another 5.5 seasons, some say too long, and was traded mid-season to the Milwaukee Bucks 2002-2003. He stayed 28 games, then the ring chasing began. Lakers, Shaq, Kobe, where it didn't pay off, following Shaq to Miami after a short stint in Boston where he was traded there. In Miami, it did work out and he won a championship as a backup to Jason Williams in 2006 with Shaquille O'Neal and Dwayne Wade. He left the game in 2007 and was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2013. All in all, Gary Payton was a great basketball player that deserved to win a championship. Should he have not ring chased and have to explain to everyone why he never won like Charles Barkley, John Stockton, and countless others? Or swallow his pride and ride the coats of